This broadcast is produced in partnership with the Multi-Jurisdictional Counter-Drug Task Force Training Program, the Florida National Guard, and St. Petersburg College.
Welcome to Raising Drug-Free Kids. I'm Mary Elizabeth Elliott, Vice President of Communications and Membership for CADCA, Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. When it comes to drug prevention, parents are truly on the front lines, and parenting matters. Young people report their parents have a great influence on their decision to use or not to use alcohol and other drugs. Today we'll talk with 3 experts and gain new insight on keeping kids drug-free. First, we'll meet Dr. Wilkie Wilson, Professor of Pharmacology and Director of BrainWorks at Duke University. Welcome, Dr. Wilson.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you on the show. Well, Doctor, you are, may I call you Wilkie?
Please.
Absolutely, good. You are here to give us the science, and we want to talk a little bit about the brain. You are a neuroscientist, correct?
That's right, exactly.
Okay. So first off, how does a neuroscientist get from the lab into teaching people about the brain out in the community?
Well, it's an interesting story. My daughter went off to college, and during her first semester, she called back and said, "Dad, you have got to write a book about this." She and I had a great relationship. I would talk to her as a scientist and teach her what she needed to know. And when she got to school, she saw that other kids needed that too.
So you're using the awareness that you have of the brain as a teaching tool. How does that work as a prevention tool?
What we find is that if you teach people the facts about the brain, how it works, how to keep it working well, how to take care of it, how to keep it safe, you create a scientific, non-judgmental rationale for doing what's healthy for the brain. And we find that that's such a refreshing approach to drug prevention that people find it very attractive. And it gives people a rationale for making the right choices.
Are adult brains different than kids' brains?
Absolutely. That's one of the great discoveries, probably the great discovery of neuroscience in the last 20 years. We've actually known that for 100 years or more, but it's only been realized since modern imaging techniques were available. And we can now see that the human brain is developing all through adolescence. In fact, some of the most critical areas for human function, those that really separate us from the higher level primates, are still being developed in the adolescent years.
So we know that the brain is developing in those teenage years. Is there a time when the brain stops developing?
Well, that's a great question. Typically, what people say is that the brain is beginning to be fully wired in the early 20s. But development is sometimes in the eye of the beholder, and the question about where you study it. And I think our brains are always changing. But these critical wiring processes are probably mostly complete by 21 to 25.
So what about decision-making skills in our young people and our brains? How does that affect them?
Well, what is really interesting about this, and what we've just realized in neuroscience, is that we need to teach people that because this wiring process is not complete, the decision-making capacities of humans are really not fully developed until this wiring is complete. Because the parts of the brain that are last to develop, those in the frontal lobe, are the parts that give us the power to handle complex operations, to carry several thoughts in mind at once, and most interestingly for this subject, to inhibit inappropriate behaviors. So it's the frontal cortex that gives us self-regulation. And until it's fully wired and fully practiced, you don't quite have the power to do that as well as you will as later on in adult life.
What about that thrill-seeking brain that we think about in adolescence? Is that something that's really there?
It is. There's no question about it. Adolescents do tend to take risks, and we now think we're beginning to understand the neurobiology of that. It's very early in that process of understanding it, but we think it relates back to actually a neurochemical that's involved in drug abuse called dopamine that actually gives you a sense of pleasure, and it appears that that circuit may be more active in adolescence, and that may drive them to do some of this.
So you mentioned dopamine. What is the dopamine hypothesis of addiction?
Well, it's interesting. Dopamine is a neurochemical in the brain that actually encodes information when you have a pleasurable experience. It also probably produces a buzz in the brain along with some other chemicals. But the key thing it does is when you have a pleasurable experience, you get a winning lottery ticket, you meet somebody attractive, you go to a restaurant and have a great meal. Biologically, your brain encodes that pleasure so that it can go and repeat it. Now, one of the things that we have discovered, again, in the last 20 to 30 years is that every addictive drug releases dopamine in the brain. That's what distinguishes agents that are addictive from those that are not addictive. Right. And so when your brain gets that hit of dopamine, whether it be a little hit from a puff of a cigarette, a big hit from a line of cocaine, or simply a pleasurable experience from a lottery ticket or a new friend in your life, it remembers that. So that it can, and it really does wire in that. The problem is that drugs of abuse release so much more dopamine than normal life experiences do, even more than a lottery ticket will, a winning lottery ticket. So you come to value the experience of doing the drug more and more and more. And eventually the only pleasures in life come from releasing dopamine through the drug, and if you don't have the drug, you feel absolutely miserable, you're depressed, you're anxious, you just feel awful, and thus you need some more drug, and that's what happens. You're addicted.
So do you teach young people about these brain changes?
Absolutely.
And what are you finding as you go out and talk to parents and kids about the brain?
When we talk to kids and parents, I have to say that their reaction is extraordinarily positive. I just gave a talk about this to Duke students the other day, and you know, Duke students are worldly people. They've been around. They've had a lot of courses. They've had the best of education usually before they get to Duke, and they were stunned. Frankly, nobody had ever talked to them in terms of neuroscience before. A lot of people had said, just don't do it. A lot of people have said, well, drugs are going to rot your brain. But they never talked to them in the concrete details. So that's really why we established BrainWorks, is to make this information accessible to people in language that people that aren't neuroscientists can understand but can use.
And BrainWorks is a relatively new program.
BrainWorks has just started.
Duke's
just wired it up.
Great. Now, when you talk to young people, are there some kids that are just going to be more susceptible to this dopamine and this situation in their brain?
There are some people that it appears from what my friends that are psychologists tell me that they can identify early on people that are at risk more for having trouble with drugs, and those are the people that are both risk-taking, they like taking risks, and they are sensation seekers. They love the sense of new experiences. Now, both of those release dopamine, so you could say at some level maybe they're dopamine junkies. I don't really know, but yes, we now think that within 10 years or a few years, we'll be able to predict who is most at risk and help them out.
Because of this brain research, are we able to say to young people that their adolescent brain is more at risk to become addicted?
Without a doubt. In fact, all the epidemiology shows that if you're going to get addicted to something, it's very likely it's going to happen in your teenage years or your early 20s, just when this development's going on. It makes perfect sense. It's not just the wiring that we talk with them about, it's the different chemistry in their brains. Their brain chemistry responds differently to drugs. For example, in our laboratories, we study adolescent effects of alcohol and marijuana, and we find that with alcohol, it is far less sedating. If you and I have a couple of glasses of wine, you know what's going to happen? We'll get sleepy. Right. We'll just get sleepy. if a kid has a couple of glasses of wine, they get buzzed. It's because their buzzed chemistry is different and their sedative chemistry is different. We talk about that and we say, yeah, it's fine for your parents to have a glass of wine with dinner. Your brain's a little different and maybe you ought to wait.
Sounds great. Thank you. We will touch more on this in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by a local coalition leader and a licensed clinical psychologist to find out how to put this science into practice.
Freeze 1.
There were stacks of heads chiseling in the easy.
There were stacks of heads chiseling in the heezy.
Freeze 2.
Homie was flossing his grip of cheddar.
Homie was flossing his grip of cheddar. His whip is a janky hoopty.
His whip is a janky hoopty.
Janky hoopty? His whip is a janky hoopy.
You may not understand your kids, but your kids understand you. Talk to them about drugs. Need help? Get help. Visit our website at drugfree.org.
What would you do if a stranger talked to you?
I wouldn't talk to them because it might be bad.
Very good. And what would you tell someone playing with matches?
I would tell them not to play with them because they might start a fire.
Wow. How come you know so much?
My mommy told me.
Oh, and what did your mommy tell you about drugs?
Your children are listening. Are you talking?
Did you know drugs can really mess up your mind? I should know. I've been there. Drugs make me slow. They make it hard to keep up in school. After doing drugs, I'm totally burned out. So do me a favor and get it into your heads. Drugs are bad for your brain. So stay away from drugs.
Welcome back. We're now joined by Kat Allen, co-chair of the Communities That Care Coalition in Franklin County, Massachusetts, and Dr. Gwen Chietta, Director of Professional Development and Research at Connect with Kids Network. Welcome, both of you, to the program.
So much. Thanks for having us.
It's great to have you on board. Kat, let's start with you. And I should mention, congratulations are in order. Kat's Coalition is one of our outstanding Coalitions of the Year award winners.
Thank you very much.
One
We're
of
very excited.
3. So Kat, you're here because you're our coalition expert. So let's talk about the hurdles that parents sometimes face when trying to talk with their kids about drugs.
Yeah, I think there are really 3 big myths that parents hold that we try to address. One of them is that parents often believe that drinking and drugs are just a rite of passage and that every kid is going to experience this and that there's nothing that parents can do. So the second is that driving under the influence is really the only concern, and they're not thinking about all the other things, all the other risks, such as violence or being vulnerable to various things, and also in terms of the risk of addiction and how drinking when you're younger can really increase that risk of addiction later. And also the third one is that parents believe that they don't have any influence over their kids once their kids hit their teenage years. And it's really empowering for parents when we can correct that myth and let them know that they do have a strong influence on their kids.
Now, empowering parents is one of the big goals of your organization, Gwen. How does Connect with Kids empower parents?
What we try to do, we don't tell them how to parent. We don't see that as our job. But there are kind of 3 things that we encourage parents to think about. One is know your child's truth. Be honest about that, and that's also one of the hurdles, that denial factor that can be a hurdle. Parents want to, that's not my child doing that. So what we encourage is know that truth about your child. Get in there, know everything that's going on with them. We also empower them to have standards. What comes with parenting, we have to set limits. It's a tough job. We know it's not easy, but setting those limits, enforcing those limits, and making them clear in terms of boundaries. And then also responsibility. We try to help parents, give them tools, give them information and resources to help them embrace their role as parents and do that responsibly. So it's a tough job, but we try to do is give them video and print materials through multimedia to help them do their job better and easier.
And speaking of multimedia, we should say that all of the great taped pieces that we're going to see today are compliments of Connect with Kids. So
thank you so much for having them. We're so excited to show.
We really appreciate it. It makes a big difference. Wilkie, I'm going to bring you in on this. What do you think that, as a parent, is the toughest hurdle in talking with your kids about drugs?
my sense of it is, from talking to literally thousands of parents, is they really struggle finding a rationale for why kids shouldn't use drugs. I think they can say, well, they hurt you, they'll addict you, and this, that, and the other. But when it really comes down to it, they're kind of saying, just don't do this because I told you not to do it. And what I think that we're finding is that when you can provide them a biological rationale for what to do, that it takes the judgment out of it. It takes the argument out of it. Nobody's going to argue with brain science. And if you teach them how to teach their kids that sort of the elementary science of what's involved, I think it goes a long way. The other thing that parents struggle with all the time is, what do you say to your kid about what you personally did?
Yes.
I would love to hear what you all think about that, because my answer to them is that, first of all, frankly, you don't tell them everything you do in your bedroom, do you? I mean, you don't have to tell them every last detail of your life. You can, you could say, I did some things and I did maybe whatever you're comfortable saying. If I knew then what I know now, I would have never done it. And my gosh, that's the truth for me.
Well, I was going to say, Wilkie, just to jump in, and it can be a double-edged sword. Some parents end up not saying anything because, gosh, then I'm going to have to reveal myself. Right. And maybe I feel like a fraud because I did some experimentation. There were some things that I tried. So it can be that one end of the spectrum where I just don't say anything because I maybe did some things. To the other end, you don't have to say everything. You can talk about it and say, like you said, if I knew then what I know now, how this would have, what I would have done differently, and what I'm doing now, and help them understand the research and make better decisions than maybe you did. So in that context of caring.
There often arises the question, and kids will ask me this all the time. They say, why is it okay for my parents to drink and not for me? And the best, cleanest answer to that is, your brain is biologically different. Your brain has different sensitivities to alcohol. It responds in a different way to alcohol. When you're an adult, drinking is actually, unless you're an alcoholic, it actually promotes health at very low levels. So I think that science is really the answer.
I think even a lot of parents don't realize that kids who drink at a young age are at a greater risk for developing problems with alcohol abuse and addiction later on. I think even parents just think, well, everybody drinks, or most adults drink, so my kid's going to do it anyway. So all I need to do is keep the keys, and then my kid will be safe.
Right. So it starts with educating the parents too, not just giving the youth the facts, but giving the parents the facts so that they can be armed with that information.
Well,
guys, we have a perfect tape for this, so if you don't mind, let's jump in and take a look at a parent that's dealing with exactly what we're talking about. Thanks.
Andrew's mom experimented when she was young.
Keep in mind, when I was Andrew's age, I was smoking pot and wasn't thinking a whole lot about it.
So when Andrew started on marijuana, she never told him no.
I thought I was better off knowing what he was doing than having him be doing it behind my back.
If parents tried drugs in their youth, what should they say to their kids? Experts say one choice is to tell the truth.
I think a child will really perk up and listen when they hear, oh, really, you experimented. What was that like? Was there peer pressure?
He says if parents do admit to using drugs, they should stress their regrets and make it clear to their kids that drug use is simply unacceptable.
I think you can use that as an opportunity to say, yes, I made some mistakes. If I had it to do over, I wouldn't do it. And it's very clear that I'm not going to allow that today.
He also says parents should explain drugs are far more potent today than they used to be.
When we were growing up, the potency of marijuana for THC was maybe 6 to 8%. With the hydroponically grown marijuana, we're seeing anywhere from 40, 50 to 60 or higher percent THC.
Today, would Pam Wolpa overlook her son's drug use?
No. Looking back, I would tell any parent never to condone it. To give a clear message from the very beginning, it's not okay.
Yeah, and remember when you were first here in the first few... All right, we're back. Thank you. So We learned there that you've got to give a clear message, obviously, that, you know, and we know parents are conflicted here. So what do we say to parents? We say, really be honest with what you're dealing with and be honest with what happened to you. I know you said, if I knew then what I knew that now. We also know about potency being different.
Mm-hmm. I think going back to the facts, as you guys were talking about in the first part of the segment, giving parents, if they can talk with their kids about that information and then use that as a springboard, that information can be a springboard for dialogue about risks, about consequences, and going beyond just the facts, but to say, what will you do if you get in a situation? Right. Share your values with your kids, help them explore theirs, and help them apply that information. You know, now that they know about these facts and data, how will that affect their decision making? So it goes from the facts and the research to actual behavior and choices.
Right. I think also what's really important is to provide a context, like a loving environment, open communication about other things. And I think the context that the message comes in is at least, if not way more important than the message itself. I think kids need to feel valued by their parents. They need to feel like they're an integral part of their family. They need to feel like the advice that their parents give them is truly because their parents really care about them and want the best for them. And once it's in that context, then any message is going to be much better received.
Absolutely. Another point I'd like to make is simply sometimes in the language that we use. Now, we are very anxious to empower our young people and make them feel like they can do anything, and often we refer to them as young adults. Well, from the standpoint of the human brain, a young adult brain is 25 years old. An 18-year-old or a 15-year-old is not a young adult brain. And I think it's important that it just get really ingrained into the brains of both kids and their parents. And what I say to parents is, you need to lend them your brain. Your brain is capable of a lot of great things that are, and knowledge and control that they don't have yet, and you just need to share your brain with your kids.
Exactly, and the experience too. They don't have the lifetime experience, and they also don't have that prefrontal cortex development to help them make those good decisions.
You know, we also take sort of, I guess maybe a slightly different perspective too, is that parents need to invite kids to lend their brain to the family too, because ultimately kids are going to be making these decisions on their own. Ultimately, you're not going to be there at the party with them, you know, when they have to say yes or no. And so, you know, parents need to give them practice, engaging in difficult tasks, difficult decision making, giving them practice in safe situations in the family and so on. So asking kids to lend their brain to the family is really important, and not just parents stepping in and helping their kids out.
Parents are so busy. And this is something too, I think, you know, media is a great help. What does the coalition do to reach those busy parents? I mean, what are some of the rules for the coalitions out there watching today who are trying to engage parents?
That's a really good question, because it's one of the biggest challenges we face. First, I would say, you know, we started out doing primarily workshops, evidence-based programs, workshops like Guiding Good Choices, Staying Connected to Your Teen, Parenting Wisely, and asking parents to come to our programs. And some things that were really, really helpful in doing that. One is having the recruiter and the facilitator be someone who's really respected by parents and well known, the principal of the school, someone who's well known in the community. Another thing is always having a convenient location, meeting parents where they're at, providing food, providing childcare, providing transportation if possible, and making it fun and engaging for them. But the other thing that we've found is that you're only going to reach a certain segment of your population by asking parents to come out to workshops. And we have been really working to expand our programming using media, using social norms marketing, doing programs that can be done one-on-one at a computer, at a parent's home, or at a library on the parent's own time. So trying to reach parents in a number of different ways is really very, very important, because you can't just preach to the choir.
It has to be multimodal. And just if I can just add on to that in terms of the media piece, that's the component that Connect with Kids can bring in terms of airing half-hour shows on issues such as drug prevention, brain development, educating parents. You know, we can reach millions of them through network television around the country. So it has to be that multi-pronged at the grassroots level as well as a broader level.
And I don't mean to, the programs, the workshops are so important, and parents can really, the parents who go through those can really share that information with their peers. It's so important to just do every level.
Kat, you mentioned social norms. And you know, the reality is most kids are not using drugs. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about social norms.
Hey.
Hey. Dad, what are you doing?
What am I?
A burrito?
No.
A larva?
A larva? No. I'm a joint.
Actually, you're a little too fat to be a joint.
So you know about joints?
There's no wrong way to talk to your kids about drugs. Need help? Get help. Visit our website at drugfree.org.
Humpty Dumpty got stoned on a wall, lost his balance, and had a great fall. All of his doctors and all his sad friends couldn't put Humpty together again. How's that?
Do you know what your kids know about drugs? Need help? Get help. Visit our website at drugfree.org.
Come on, buddy. Let's go.
Dad, did you ever do drugs?
Yeah, I did, and it was a dumb thing to do. But no one ever talked to me about it. My dad never talked to me about it.
Talking to your kids about drugs can be tough. Need help? Get help. Visit our website at drugfree.org.
We're back with Raising Drug-Free Kids. Let's talk a little bit about risky behaviors and kids. Is it just part of being a teenager?
Part of it actually is, going back to the brain research and the fact that the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, those decision-making skills, critical thinking skills, judgment and impulse control. So there is that built-in kind of biological piece that's going on that makes risky behavior more prevalent. And that's also why it's so important, Mary, as well, that parents stay connected at that time, that they help their kids to learn skills to make good decisions as well. So it's a paradox.
I think risky behavior is part of being human and part of being very much part of our American culture. And certainly youth are at a real prime time for taking risks and testing limits, just as toddlers are at a key point for testing limits. And we need to encourage youth to be able to take risks. It's a necessary part of being successful in life. But we need to provide safe context and safe, very clear limits so that they're able to make tough decisions that are still safe for them.
Exactly. There's actually some more biology coming out, and it's preliminary, but it's really interesting that suggests that there may actually be a fall in the level of pleasure chemicals in the brain as you enter adolescence. And that would tend to make kids separate from the family, go out and take risks, which is really what you want adolescents to do. But historically, they could do that at a much earlier age than they do now in this culture where they have to stay home and be in school till 18 and then in college. So, I mean, one of the things that I find really empowers parents is to explain to them that there may well be strong biological differences in their kids that are guiding this behavior. I know at one time I said, to my daughter, my gosh, it's like you're possessed. I mean, and it was to me like that. But knowing that it's biochemical to some extent and neurobiological in nature is in many ways empowering, because for example, if you encounter somebody that has a known brain lesion, a brain tumor or whatever, you're not going to hate them. You're not going to just despise them, but you may not put a gun in their hands. Right. You may at least understand that this is tumor or this lesion is what's driving them to behave that way. So I guess my point being that the more we understand about our kids, the easier it is to parent them.
One thing I think is really important for people to keep in mind with the new brain research that's coming out, I guess I have a concern that one thing we know works, it works to empower youth, to make sure that youth feel connected to their school, their family, their community, and empowered by their school, their family, and their community. And I guess I worry that when this brain research is being applied, we need to make sure that we're not disempowering youth by saying, hey, you're not fully developed. We need to be sure that it's still that we're still sending a very clear message that youth are important contributing members of their community and important contributing members of their family and so on.
Yeah, I agree with you. They need to practice being skilled and responsible and great decision making. We have to find ways for them to do that safely.
And having that information can help parents to help them do that more effectively.
Yeah, and not letting them off the hook too. I would just say
consequences.
That, we're teaching teens that their brains are developing, but that's not an excuse for them to say, "Hey, man, I can do it because I'm still a work in progress."
And it's not
give me 10 years and I'll be over this phase.
Right, and it's not an excuse for parents to say, to be patronizing and to cut their kids out of decisions and to just try to make decisions for them. I mean, we need to value kids as much as we possibly can.
One of the biggest ways that many of our coalitions across the country are showing that they value kids is getting them involved with social norm campaigns. And I know, Kat, you've done some of this in your community. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Certainly. We use social norms marketing techniques, and our most successful campaigns have been youth-led. So we teach kids the principles of marketing and how social norms marketing works, that if they can correct their peers' misperceptions that everyone is doing it, then risky behaviors in turn are going to go down. So this has been really, really a successful and empowering experience for youth. And we've just recently received a grant to extend this to parents as well, because parents too, they think, oh, well, all other parents are serving alcohol to kids, or all other parents are sort of turning a blind eye when their kids are coming home drunk or something. And when you can correct those unhealthy misperceptions and teach them that actually the social norm is really quite healthy and most parents don't want their kids to be drinking and most parents don't want their kids smoking, then parents can then feel empowered and more parents will come to that healthy norm.
And they really can. Youth can really turn the tide. I mean, speaking from personal experience, working around the country, whether it's a bullying issue or a health issue. We did a whole statewide health piece here in Florida, training kids to be ambassadors, to go back to their communities, to their schools, to use tools, whether it's media tools or print tools, to get other kids involved. And it's amazing to watch what happens when they say, wow, even themselves, bullies, for example, saying, I didn't realize that I was affecting somebody like that, or I'm going to stand up the next time I see this happening, or if it's a drug issue, I'm going to help my friend make the right decision. And it's amazing to see that contagion effect that youth can have on each other.
Especially kids, and actually all people want to fit in, and if they think, well, everybody's bullying like this, or kids think it's cool when I'm doing that, when you let them know that no, everyone isn't, and most kids actually don't think it's cool when you do that, that can have a really profound effect on behavior.
You mentioned the idea that parents need to know that others are not serving alcohol, and that's a big myth. And one of the greatest contributors to youth drug use is quite simply access. For example, parents need to be aware that most kids get their alcohol and prescription and over-the-counter drugs from the homes of their friends and their family. Let's take a look.
Nick, who wants to be anonymous, says he started drinking when he was 12 years old.
I loved it. I was off to the races then. It made me feel 10 feet tall and bulletproof.
Where did he get his first taste?
I think it was off some Jack Daniels that I got out of my parents' liquor cabinet.
In fact, according to a report in the journal Preventive Medicine, preteens are more likely to get alcohol from their own home or a friend's home than any other place.
I think parents are just oblivious to the fact that their kids are drinking. They just think that they're too young to start thinking about alcohol, and so they're not checking their supplies. They're not seeing, is the whiskey going down in the bottle? Is there a beer missing from the refrigerator? Is there a wine cooler missing from the refrigerator? They're not even paying attention to it.
Experts say the younger a child starts drinking, the more likely they are to suffer damage to their brain, heart, and liver, and the less likely they are to ever put down the bottle.
If they start drinking before age 15, the chances of them developing alcoholism are much greater because they're learning early on to use alcohol as a social crutch.
Nick's last drink was over a year ago, the night he totaled his truck while drinking and driving.
I woke up in the driver's side seat, blood all over me, glass everywhere.
His mom says if she had to do it all over again, she'd make sure alcohol was out of his reach.
It wasn't that easily accessible. I would certainly make it totally inaccessible to kids.
Well, guys, you know that these stories, we hear them all the time of parents who say, I wish I would have placed more limits. I wish I would have been checking on my kids a little bit more. How do you enforce some rules and boundaries, you know, without, and still give them that a little bit of freedom? It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It really is, and I think it goes back to something you said earlier, Kat, about the context. Having an authoritative type of relationship where boundaries are clearly set, they're clear, and they're also enforced, but doing that in a context of caring and dialogue. I mean, listening to our kids is so powerful. Having conversation with them on a regular basis so that this fits into a broader context. It's not a reactive type of measure, but it's proactive. You've got a trusting relationship, and so this doesn't come as a surprise. You've got that basic context, and so there is a trust there that kids will have with their parents around those boundaries. That's one of the key things.
We have a few key points that we focus on with parents. One is that parents really need to give kids meaningful roles in the family, ways that they are contributing uniquely. And another is that they need to give a lot of praise to their kids. That dopamine hit that you were talking about earlier, that works in terms of praise. You know, if you praise your kid when they're doing something good, they're going to do it again. And then also talking to them, talking, setting clear rules and clear limits, and finally knowing about your kids, knowing your kids' friends, what they're out and doing right now, who they're with, and when they're going to be home, and so on. So some monitoring enforcement.
I actually have a very concrete suggestion that I wish every community would get into the culture of the parents, and that is when the baby comes into the household, put a lock on the liquor cabinet. At that point, there is no issue of trust. There's no issue of, well, you don't trust me, this is not fair, why are you locking up the liquor? You're locking up the liquor cabinet because their brains don't have the inhibition that they need to have. It happened in my own family. My daughter watered down the liquor bottle, and I found it 10 years later.
Well, just like we lock up our poisons to protect our kids, I think that makes.
And if you
perfect
start
sense.
young, very young,
it's not an issue.
yeah,
It's
that's
not
the way it
an
always
issue.
was.
You can't do that when they're, well, you can do it when they're teenagers,
Right.
and maybe you should, but it's much easier if you start early.
Well, you know, we know that parents need to stick to parenting and not worry about being their kid's friend. But one family, unfortunately, learned this lesson only after tragedy struck.
Last year, Ashley Roy broke her neck in a car crash. She's now paralyzed from the chest down.
Roll over and push yourself up on this arm and then pull this one back. Okay.
She had been drinking and smoking pot when she flipped her Jeep on this country road.
I still do have days where I wake up and just want it to be a dream so badly.
Before the accident, Ashley's mom and dad sensed their daughter had been making bad choices.
We had talked that we just need to sit and talk with her and listen to her and let her tell us what's going on.
But they never had that talk. According to a White House survey, almost 60% of parents admit they have a hard time talking to their kids about difficult topics like drug use. One reason, parents are afraid of sounding mean.
You know, I work with parents every day that are trying to be buddies with their kids. They want their kids to think of them as a friend.
She says parents need to say no, set boundaries, be a parent, even if your child gets upset.
They're going to bug you, they're going to cry, they're going to say you're the worst parents in the world, they're going to say I hate you, they're going to do things that are not pleasant. And that's not fun. You know, that's not the fun part of parenting, but it's the right part of parenting. It's the important part of parenting.
Today, Ashley and her parents wish they could turn back the clock.
Hindsight, you know, we would love to still have her mad at us, but still have her before she, you know, was injured in the accident, and still have her to be able to do all the things she used to do.
Tough story. Wow. I feel like I need to thank my mother right now for for being such a great parent. You know, my folks waited up for me at night. I mean, we had a lot of boundaries and rules and curfews, and the tough thing is that something can still go awry. But what we have to try to do is arm parents as much as we can with the tools that they need.
Right. One important point, though, is that a parent can do everything exactly right, exactly textbook, and there can still be a tragedy. And so, you know, I think parents try so hard, you know, and it's really easy for programs to get down on parents like, hey, we're offering these great programs and no one's showing up. Well, we're also telling them how important it is to have family dinners every night and to spend time with your kids. And the competing demands on parents is just, it's, you know, so much that we're asking of them. And parents, I mean, these parents are all trying really hard.
Guys, what about
They are trying. Yeah.
What about these parents who host parties? I mean, they've talked about being a parent, not a friend, but they have this expectation that if I keep the party here where I can watch the kids, I'm keeping my kids safe.
That's a really dangerous line to walk. I mean, there's a couple of issues there. One is the legal issue. You know, if we just want to look at it from a legality perspective, you can't have underage kids drinking and then many of them getting on the road and driving home. It also sends a double message, which is very confusing to your kids. If you start with, well, it's okay if you drink here at home, you're still sending that message that it's okay to drink. And so that next step from there may be to go drink somewhere else. And so you just don't want to send that double message.
Mm-hmm. I can't imagine one of these parties in which there is really adequate monitoring of consumption of alcohol either. I mean, a kid will come in with a bottle of vodka, which can be, you know, enough to actually kill the child if they drink all of it. And I doubt that the parents are down there monitoring the drinking all the time it's going on.
One interesting thing, though, from a prevention perspective, these parents are misguided but feel like they're actually doing the right thing. They think they're protecting parents, and so it can be kind of an easy education thing, maybe not super easy, but when these parents come around and see that to protect their kids and to do right by their kids, they need to set clear limits of no drug and alcohol use. That can
They're
be
doing that because they do think it's the best option, right? So how can we educate parents that there may be a third option?
And let them know that it's not just drinking and driving that we're concerned about. There's problems, there's risk with binge drinking and early drinking and so on.
And we know that at these parties, to go back to your point, 90% of the kids of teenagers, many of them they're drinking to get drunk. Right. So it isn't just about let's go have that glass of wine with the barbecue. It really is, and with the brain research, I mean, we know there's more damage done cumulatively. So it's a double, you know, a double-edged sword there.
Another tip for parents that I think is really important is you said stay up with waiting for your kids. Absolutely, no question, and kiss them goodnight. Because when you kiss them goodnight, you can look in their eyes and smell their breath. I mean, not only is it a nice, loving thing,
and it's a nice, loving thing to do.
It's a nice, loving thing to do, but you can get a lot of data that way.
Yeah, and you're never too old for a hug, right?
Never too old for a hug.
So now we've talked about you know, protecting our kids, locking up the liquor cabinets, and we've talked about these parents that might think that they're doing the right thing by hosting. There's a program I think that Kat, you have been working with called Safe Homes Network. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Safe Homes Parent Network is a great program. In essence, it's a simple tool where parents agree that they will supervise all parties in their house and that they won't allow any drugs, alcohol, or tobacco at their parties. And it's a parent-driven initiative, so it's not a proprietary program. It doesn't cost anything, but you do need a small group of really dedicated parents to get other parents to sign on to this network. And they exchange phone numbers, and they are encouraged to call each other when their kid is going over for a party at someone else's house. And in essence, it's really a social norms campaign because, you know, the school district, Mohawk School District that we've been working with for several years, they have 60% of their parents on board, and they're able to say most parents don't want drinking at their parties. Most parents agree to this set of guidelines.
What do you do about those few toxic parents that are going to be troublemakers.
Oh, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I mean, the best thing is to reach them early. You know, when their kids are entering the school, they know there's this Safe Homes Parent Network, and all of the parents are agreeing that they don't want this.
Great. So you're changing the social norms
and
for the parents.
In those cases where you can't, sometimes it's past that that point, and it's tough to reach the parents. But can we reach the kids? You know, can we provide them a safe haven, bring them involved with the other kids in the non-drinking homes, provide them with a secure relationship? We know that one healthy, stable relationship does wonders for a child's lifetime. So if we can't reach the parents, let's try to reach the kids.
Sounds good. Well, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about parenting in the new millennium.
You might decide to change your hair, if everyone else did. You might decide to get a tattoo, if everyone else did. You might decide to get something pierced, if everyone else did. You might even decide to smoke pot, if everyone else did. Well, guess what? Not everyone else does.
Hey, son. So, you're turning 13, becoming a man. Your hormones are surging, starting to notice the girls. You know, maybe your body's doing some funny things. So, you want to talk? Or we could talk about drugs.
Yeah, let's talk about drugs.
There's no wrong way to talk to your kids about drugs. Need help? Get help. Visit our website at drugfree.org.
Welcome back. Well, we're talking about parenting in the new millennium. So what does that really mean to us? What do you think?
Well, one of the pieces that I would first off say is we have to parent not just in the real world, but we also have to parent in the virtual world. We have so much technology, so much information coming at us with cell phones, text messaging, the internet, and parents have to also parent in that internet, in that virtual space. And that's one of the things that previous generations did not have to worry about.
Kids are right now inhabiting a world that parents are totally unfamiliar with. And it's really in this generation, next generation, the parents will be familiar with the internet, but right now parents are lost.
Yeah, our kids are more tech savvy than many of than we are. So we have to catch up, make sure that we understand what the issues, what the safety issues are, what we need to do to help them be better parents in that space. Where do you put a computer? How do you help kids manage their time online? We know that kids are spending more than 60 hours a week. Whether it's video games, being on the internet, cell phones. So what are they losing by spending all of that time?
I'll tell you one thing that they're losing that is just critically important, and it's sleep. Kids are not getting enough sleep, and there's enormous biological data to indicate that sleep is just critical to their mental development, to their academic performance, their physical development. And when the kids are out there, they go into their rooms and they start using their computers and they text message and send all kinds of emails and whatnot, and they're not getting in bed and going to sleep.
So does that sleep affect their decision-making ability?
Unequivocally, it selects their it affects their cognitive function. We know now that the brain stores what it learns during the day when you're asleep at night. So I tell parents the best way to improve your kids' academic performance is to get them in bed and get them asleep and stay there for 9 hours.
And you just mentioned another concern. When they go in their room and get online,
you don't know what they're doing.
What are they doing? Connect with Kids just did a half-hour show called Screen Addicts that'll be coming out, looking at youth getting online gambling, high school, college students spending more time gambling, getting in debt, buying drugs. We're talking about the drug prevention piece. Youth are going online. They can find ingredients, how to put together different kinds of drug cocktails, order those things, and have parties with their friends. Many parents don't even know about that. So what's happening when they're in their room with that door shut, going online?
Right. Well, parents really need to be aware, and they need to know what's going on online, and coalitions can help them do that, and CADCA can as well, my organization. But we also tell parents to be very involved in their lives, but there's also you can go too far. So You know, there is this term called helicopter parents. And this helicopter parents term has become part of the lexicon. It describes parents who hover over their children and help them make all their decisions. Well, experts tell parents, be engaged in your children's lives, but can they go too far? Let's take a look.
College freshman Sarah Catherman calls her parents before every decision.
Just because it's like I'm on my own and I'm only a freshman, so some things are just like, eek, I need to talk to someone about it.
She's not alone. Students admit to calling their parents about everything, from money to choosing classes to dealing with roommates.
I've been in the laundry room and kids have, said, hey, Mom, how do you wash clothes?
Like I have a car and I didn't have one in high school, and I have to call them up all the time, like about little things like changing the oil and when I need to wash it, things like that.
I've been known for the last few years to call the cell phone, though, the world's longest umbilical cord. Many of our students will call their parent, talk to their mother or father 4 and 5 times a day. A day.
The problem, he says, is when kids face more serious issues. A fight with a roommate, a conflict with a professor. They won't know what to do.
So today's students really haven't learned how to solve conflict, haven't learned how to confront each other, because the parents have been willing to be in the middle of virtually every decision.
College advisors say parents who believe they are too involved in their students' decisions should back off slowly. Explain why you won't be calling as often, and when you do call, resist giving advice.
And figure out what are the right questions to ask the student, as opposed to, I will fix that for you, I will make that call, or you need to see so-and-so. It's, what do you think you should do?
At some point, you're going to be on your own, so you might as well start doing things on your own now, because they're not always going to be there to do everything for you.
You know, this really goes back to what we were talking about with technology. I feel like the fact that we've got cell phones at the ready makes it even easier for us to call our parents about everything. I call my mom for recipes all the time, but I don't remember calling her that much when I was in college, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one thing that happens, I mean, Gwen, you talked about how many hours a day, a week that kids are spending. Parents, too, are spending so much time in technology, taking phone calls from everyone online and so on, and it reduces the amount of quality time. So there is this sort of, they're being called on to make kids' decisions, and they're not being able to spend the kind of quality time that parents need to spend with their kids.
And sometimes it's easier when you're in a rush just to give that answer rather than help walk through a problem solving and help them figure that out. I do training all over the country, and over again, one of the things that teachers tell me across the country is our kids are not making decisions. They're not learning. There's no place in school where this is happening. We're up with all the testing mandates and things like that. There's this pressure to just have the information. And so that's one of their concerns, is that we're not raising kids who have good critical thinking skills. And I hear that over and over again.
Well, everything we know about the brain is that if you practice, it gets better at doing whatever it's doing, whether it's learning to play tennis or doing a math problem or giving a talk in front of folks. And there's no reason to believe that that doesn't apply to decision making also. That as you practice decision making and practicing, and I like what you said about teaching your kids, helping your kids to personally take responsibility for their actions and their lives and their environment, and that's practice for the future when they have to actually exercise very serious self-control.
And just to add on to that as well, Wilkie, when when kids can make their own decisions, and they're not always going to be the best, but when they can learn a process to make healthy decisions, that helps to build self-esteem. If we feel like we don't have the capacity to make our own decisions, that's also a self-esteem piece, and that ties back to the drug prevention piece. If you get in a situation where there's peer pressure or you have to make a decision and you can't call your mom about what to do, are you going to have the skills it takes to make a good decision?
It's also one of the key elements of bonding. We know that kids need to be bonded to their families, their schools, and so on, and really they need to be given skills, recognition for those skills, opportunity to practice those skills. Those are the 3 key ingredients from the social development model.
Are there ways to determine whether your child makes better decisions than others? Can you sort of look at your kids and say, this one's going to need a little bit more help, or boy, she's got it,
I think it happens through, again, the dialogue, having conversations with them. Look at opportunities about, an example comes up or a situation. Ask your child, what would you do in that situation? Walk me through how you would handle that. So through that dialogue, you can determine, are they a good decision maker, and help them walk through that process. So I think, again, it comes through the listening and the talking and spending quality time.
Yeah, and if parents are connected to their kids, then they'll have a really good intuition about, what kind of kid is yours and what are the real risks for my particular child.
I think it's really important to keep in mind what you really want your child to do is to make great decisions. And those decisions can come at any time in the process. For example, the deal that we made with our girls is if somehow you get to a party and you do get too intoxicated to drive home, you call, we'll come and get you, and you're not going to be in trouble for calling. Mm-hmm. And I really think that decision to call, even when you're really intoxicated, is a mark of good decision making.
Absolutely, absolutely. We saw a lot of PSAs throughout the show today, and they were saying that there's no right way. You've just got to find the time to talk with your kids, and they used a lot of humor. But is there a best way to talk to your kids?
Early and often. Talk early, talk often. I think it's never too early to start. My son is 20 months old, and when I see people smoking outside with him, I say, hey, she's smoking. That's yucky. You don't want to do that because you want to be strong and healthy. The other day I caught him saying yucky when he saw somebody smoking, so I need to find a new strategy.
Tell them the
there's
truth.
no wrong way.
Tell them the truth, right. And listen. Oftentimes we're very good at talking, but really listening to your kids. What are they saying? Feeding that back to them, reflecting that back so they know that you've really heard them and made that connection is one of the most powerful things that you can do.
What about the mentality that if you talk to them, they're going to go do it?
The research shows over and over again that it's not true. It's a really legitimate concern that well-meaning parents have when it comes to drugs, when it comes to sex, and the research shows over and over again that talking about it actually has the opposite effect, that they're more likely to share your values if you share your values with them.
I think especially too when you bring in facts, like where we started in this conversation today, explore the information together. Do a little activity with your child, find out more about, what is the impact of drugs. Doing those kinds of things together can also lead to really great outcomes.
Let's talk a little bit about resources. We always try to leave folks with some resources, and coalitions, which do broad population level work, also help communities decide on effective parenting programs like what we're talking about today. So there are some resources out there, and what would you tell coalitions when they're trying to select a parenting program?
Well, I think it's really, really important that coalitions stick to what has been shown to work. Stick to the evidence-based programs, the list, the NRAP list, the Department of Education list, the official list of programs that have been shown to work, because we don't have the resources to do a full-fledged evaluation and to evaluate whether a program is effective or not. We need to rely on the work that's been done. Their resources are too few and far between to be using them on programs that have not been shown to work.
So you said NREP. Now, for our folks at home, they might not know what that means. That's a national registry for programs and practices, effective programs and practices. So that's out of SAMHSA, but we know Department of Ed has the same sort of
What Works Clearinghouse.
Right. And then Department of Justice does as well. So if folks go online, they should be able to find effective parenting programs that they can apply.
Model programs.
Yep, absolutely. Any final thoughts from you all about raising drug-free kids? Wilkie?
Love your kids enough to take care of them.
That's a good final thought.
Yeah, listen, and I would say too, if we have parenting resources at connectwithkids.com as well, if parents want to visit that site as well, or coalitions for that matter.
And love your kids and get good, high-quality information, because I think there's no shortage of love to go around, but oftentimes parents make decisions in a vacuum of information.
And I would just say for parents out there watching, join a coalition. You can go to CADCA.org, and we can help you find a coalition in your area. And getting engaged in a coalition will help the parents be more aware of what their kids are facing. So I want to thank our panel. This is all the time we have today. Thank you to our panel.
It's a pleasure.
And I'd like to thank our guests, Kat, Wilkie, and Gwen. And I'd like to thank all of you at home for watching Raising Drug-Free Kids.